Hello, everyone. I have to say something right out here. I am 19 years old, and for a long period of time, I believed that my family was only mildly dysfunctional. But lately, I have come to see how much I have been misled, and how really screwed things were. I'll attempt to clarify everything as best as I can. I'm still sorting all of this. Usually the black sheep in my family, I have always. Being the younger of two, Madison, or Maddie as we call her, has always been the golden child. There was never a moment in my life when I felt invisible compared to her. No matter what, my mother Carol and stepdad Jacob always seemed to put her first. Worse, I felt as though I never really connected with them. Since Dad died in a vehicle accident when I was just a baby, I don't remember much of my real father. Nevertheless, I have heard enough stories to know he was a decent man, and I often feel sad since I never got to meet him. My mother married him young, according what I know, and had Maddie. She remarried Jacob not long after since she was just 19 when he passed away. Jacob has always been somewhat difficult. Although he was clean when my mother married him, he has always had a bad background with narcotics. I suppose the one thing I can say is that he made every effort to remain clean. But I never felt completely comfortable around him, since relapses usually occur. I hated that he always treated me as though I were only a side player in his life. Now, Maddie and I have always had an unusual relationship. She is 4 years my senior, hence by the time I started to pay more attention to things, she was already a teen living her own life. But I was placed in the background as we grew up as my mom and Jacob were paying increasing attention to her. I used to attempt to participate in family events when I was younger, but always there was this barrier, like I wasn't really wanted there. Jacob would simply overlook me while my mother would choose Maddie. Never felt like I fit in my own family. But once Maddie became pregnant, things truly go south. She was 24, hence my mother and Jacob were quite surprised. Naturally, my mother was encouraging, and Jacob as usual tried to act as though everything was under control. Still, I could sense the strain mounting. Everything revolved on Maddie's pregnancy, and I felt suddenly more invisible than I had ever been. Everyone was too focused on her baby, that I could not even demand attention. Then it occurred. Just before my senior year examinations, I had turned 18. Maybe even some acknowledgement as an adult, I felt I would at last be experiencing some freedom. But rather, my life collapsed. When Maddie returned to live with us, my parents made it plain they wanted to help her through her pregnancy. She needed somewhere safe and they were ready to assist her. No issue then? Except they advised I should be leaving. They informed me I couldn't remain in the house anymore, but I'm not sure if it was because they needed room for Maddie, or if they were just bored of me around. Just, it's time for you to go. At the moment, I was startled and without explanation or sympathy. I had just begun studying for my tests, and had not done anything wrong. Still, I was thrown out as though I were nothing. I knew nowhere to go. Not wanting to bother my pals, who lived with their parents, I couldn't even hang around with them. Fortunately, though, Emma, my best friend, came through for me. She was not slow to provide me with lodging. Honestly, the only reason I didn't wind up on the streets was moving in with her and her family. In many respects, living with Emma's family was relief. I felt cared for in a way I had never experienced, and I was not treated like an outsider. Though they were dealing with personal issues, her parents treated me as though I were one of their own and were friendly. Adjusting to this new life, a life apart from my family, was the only thing I could think about. It was difficult, even though I tried not to be resentful about the circumstances. Every day I spent away from Jacob felt like a reminder of how little I meant to him. My mother, I was left to fend for myself, while Maddie was out there gathering all the help and attention she could ask for. Not even a, "Hey, how are you?" No phone calls, no check-ins from any of my family. I knew they were not really interested. The worst of all is also, Maddie never even made a concerted effort to get in touch. To her too, I was invisible. She seemed overly preoccupied with her pregnancy, which in some sense helped her to overlook me. I seemed to have never existed at all initially. I soon came to see I had to start considering my future. I could not rely on anyone anymore. I thus lowered my head and turned my attention on education. I somehow secured a scholarship for a nearby university, and for me, that seemed like a minor triumph. I had accomplished something on my own in spite of all. Knowing that I would have to pay them off finally, I also borrowed some student loans to help cover the remaining. After a time, I gave up attempting to get in touch with my relatives. Every time I considered getting in touch to either my mother or Jacob, I felt a great sense of rejection. Having given them everything I could, they still picked Maddie above me. Even trying causes too much pain. Still, life was ahead. For the first time, I was starting to believe I could do it all on my own as I neared my degree. There was a part of me that lost need for them. Still, there was a kind of longing for things to have been different. And at that point, everything started to change. Following all that happened with my family, I discovered a different rhythm in life, one free of my family. I was first merely trying to get through every day. Being kicked out left emotional scars still fresh, and I lacked the will to consider my future too closely. I understood just that I had to keep my head down and finish my education. My rock were Emma and her family. Though I tried my best to assist out, I could never completely pay them back for bringing me in. Around the house, I made myself helpful running errands, watching Emma's younger siblings, everything I could do to make them feel as though I wasn't a hassle. Emma's mother, Mrs. Green, was very helpful. She would sit with me following dinner and inquire about my mood and school performance. Though it seemed little, it meant everything. I hadn't felt totally alone in a very long time before. I also found work part-time at a nearby coffee shop. Although the hours were demanding and the work was hard, the tips were good and provided me a sense of independence I had not particularly experienced before. I began to create a life outside the turmoil of my family. I had no need for permission. I could manage everything on my own. It felt in a way I never would have anticipated empowering. The scholarship I received for the nearby university significantly lessened financial burden. Actually, it was a great relief. Although I have always been a decent student, I never considered it would be sufficient to get me through college. Still, the reality of student loans began to weigh in. Though that was a future issue, I knew I would be in debt for some time following graduation. Right now, all I could concentrate on was a strong plan. I stopped getting messages from either Jacob or my mother. Though there was always a small part of me hoping they would come around. I never really expected anything different. Perhaps message to check in or at least admit how deeply they wounded me. No, however. Quietness. Soon, that stillness started to become second nature. They seemed to have totally cut me out of their life. I suppose I became less enraged, least not in the manner I had been accustomed to. Every time I considered my mother and Jacob, I was not driven with wrath. It was unhealthy, and it was not moving me forward. The wrath began to wane, replaced by a quiet kind of resignation. I had to grow used to the knowledge that they were not returning into my life. I stayed mostly focused on what I could influence, my future, in the interim. Though my classes were challenging, I maintained good marks. I felt as though I was forging my own road the more I knew. I understood I would not be like my mother, Jacob, or any other person from my background. I vowed not to let their errors define me. I thought about Maddie a lot, among other things. To be honest, I was at a loss for ideas concerning her lately. Now an adult with her own family, I suppose I expected she would be the one reaching out. Nonetheless, she never did. Every time I came into a post on her pregnancy or children on social media, it felt like a slap in the face. She could simply go on like that? How can she not give me any thought? Still, I refused to allow my hurt rule me. I was more concerned with more major issues. Then one evening I noticed an email alert on my phone while getting ready for bed. From my mother, it was my heart saint missed a beat. Almost I closed it. But I clicked on curiosity as it overcame me. Though brief, the message was unusual. She admitted she wanted things right, and she was sorry for everything that had transpired. She claimed she missed me, and that she was hoping we could talk things through. It wasn't an apology in the literal sense of the word, but it was the closest thing I had gotten from her in more than a year. I knew nothing at first about what to do. Really, how could I simply overlook everything? How was I meant to get past the way she had thrown me out, and how she and Jacob had treated me? But part of me reasoned, maybe this was it. Perhaps this was the opportunity I had been waiting for, the chance to at last reestablish what we had once had. But I considered everything once again later. I considered their lack of actual fight for me, how I had always been the second choice, the afterglow. I also came to see that I no longer needed them. I went to work the following morning, heartbroken, but with a clear head. I replied to her email not once. Deep down, I understood that opening that door wasn't best for me. I didn't want to. I had created something for myself after spending so long by myself. I stopped needing them to be entire. Still, a tiny bit of me persisted in not completely getting rid of the need for anything greater. They should feel ashamed of what they had done. I wanted them to miss me exactly as I missed them. But I understood that was impractical. Emma's family sensed something was strange about around that time. I was withdrawing and not talking about my mom or Jacob as much either. Though I wanted not to delve into it, they understood something had happened. I told them I was good. Actually, though, I wasn't exactly sure what okay meant now. Then arrived the call on the phone. From a number I couldn't identify. Those were my grandparents. Before, my grandparents had never contacted me. To be honest, seeing their name flash on my phone screen made me not sure what to expect. I had no idea they were still even looking for me, or if they even knew where I was. My mother had always painted them as the story's villains, the ones who had turned their backs on their family and spurned her. She had made sure to keep me away from them, telling me over and again that they would never understand her decisions and that they did not care about us. My mind was therefore full with questions as I answered the phone, but the one thing I did not anticipate was kindness. The voice on the other end whispered softly, "Hello, dear. It's your grandmother." Even years of stillness, this sweet, familiar tone sounded somehow consoling. "I hope we're not upsetting you." I was mute for a little period. What to say was unknown to me. My mind kept on the way my mother had portrayed them as the terrible ones, how she constantly made them sound as though they didn't care about me or her. But listening to her now, I had no idea what to believe. I had a million questions. Why didn't they get in touch earlier? Why had they not tried to get in touch with me after I was expelled? Above all, how much of what my mother had told me about them was really true? Try to keep your voice steady. No, you're not upsetting me, I said. Simply said, "It's been a long time." "I know," my grandmother said, her voice rich in feeling. "We regret that. Years of trying to get in touch with your mother have yielded her keeping distance from us. We missed you, and have heard so many things we did not want to accept. Still, we wanted you to know that we care about you, and are here." For that, I had no idea what to say. Part of me yearned to ask questions and demand responses for all the years of silence. Still, I harbored a terrified side as well. Terrified of hearing things I wasn't ready to hear. Terrified to learn that all I had been told about them was a lie, and that perhaps all along I had been mistaken. Why did you not get in touch earlier?" At last, my voice quivering somewhat, I questioned. "I had no idea you were trying." "Your mother never let us," my grandmother remarked gently. "She said she was taking care of everything and you were good, and we came to believe her. We were heartbroken, though, when we learned the reality. We had no idea what she was going through. The ground seemed to be turning beneath me. I had always thought of my grandparents as having deserted us. I believed it was us who were turned away, not the other way around. But hearing her say that she could recognize the suffering I had gone through, was if someone had just removed the blindfold off my eyes. "She told you I was good." My voice just above a whisper, I asked. "She told you she kicked me out? When I had nowhere to go?" "Indeed," my grandmother answered, sounding quite offended. "She reported that everything was fine and you were staying with a friend, but what we heard was different. We were not aware you were struggling on your own, and learning about it destroyed us. For a long period I was quiet, trying to understand all she was saying. It felt as though all I knew was disintegrating even as a great weight seemed to be taken off of my shoulders. Raised to believe that my grandparents had driven my mother away, and that they showed no concern for me, I had. But right now I was hearing another narrative. "So, you have been attempting to get in touch with me all through?" My voice broke as I asked. "Yes," my grandma said. "But she drove us away each time we tried. She informed us we had no right to meddle, and we were not welcome in your life. We listened also since we wanted to avoid making your life more difficult. We cannot, however, stand by and let you suffer alone today." I had nowhere to speak. I thought I was caught between two truths and had no idea which one to believe. My grandparents appeared so very sincerely worried about me now, or my mom's perspective of things, where she was the victim and everyone else was the problem. Though I had to sort everything, one thing was obvious. I no longer wanted to live in darkness. Are we able to meet? At last, my voice quietened, and I asked, could we perhaps have a personal conversation? Of course, my grandma responded, her voice full of affection. We would really love to see you. We only want to check on you. We are here for you, no matter what. We have missed you. I said I would meet them the next weekend. Though I knew I had to hear their side of the story, a million things were racing through my head. Regarding everything, I wanted the truth. The reality about my mother, about my family, about the reason things had turned out as they had. I felt something was strange during the next few days. Though I didn't know what it was yet, I felt that my mom's silence, her neglect to follow up after that first email, was more than just happenance. She had been so fast to cut me off before, hence it seemed absurd for her to suddenly show concern after all this time. It seemed as though something else was underway beneath the surface. When I did meet my grandparents at last, they revealed a lot of information I wasn't prepared to hear. Over the years, they have financially supported my mother, purchasing her house, lending her assistance during times of struggle with Jacob's addiction. She had turned down their assistance, even though they had always wanted to be there for her. She pushed them away every time they tried to get in touch her many times. I was startled. Though I had always accepted the story they had turned away from us, suddenly I realized how mistaken I had been. My mother had rejected them. They had cared. They had tried. It seemed as though bits of the jigsaw were at last clicking together as they spoke. Everything that had perplexed me, the guilt, the stress, the quiet, started to make sense. That did not, however, make the truth any more palatable. It did not remove the years of hurt or the years of uncertainty. But at least right now I understood the truth. And there was relief, just by itself. The phone call came quite unannounced. To be honest, I felt I would never hear from my grandparents once it had been so long since I had spoken with them. Not following the course of events with my mother. My heart missed a beat when I picked up, not sure what to expect. Hi? My voice a touch more wary than I intended, I responded. Is this your name? Calmer but forceful. The voice on the other end asked. It was Grandpa. Despite not having spoken in years, I could immediately identify his voice. A knot developing in my throat, I responded. Yeah, this is me. I had no idea how I should feel. Part of me wanted to hang around, acting as though everything was good, and I had no need to hear what they had to say. Still another aspect of me yearned closure and answers. I so stayed on the line. We have been trying to get in touch with you for some time now, Grandpa said. We have a lot to talk about, and I believe it is time you hear the truth. Reality. Though I had no idea what he meant, I could already get anxiety building in my chest. He started talking once more before I could say anything. Your mother has been distorting things for you, about us, about her past, things about why she has chosen what she has. We owe it to you to share all. I was spinning a lot of questions in my head. Not lately have I given my grandparents any thought. They had been gone for so long, and any ideas of reconciliation with my mom and Jacob had been eclipsed by the hurt from all that had happened. Now, though, they were phoning, claiming to have been attempting to get in touch and provide me with some vital information. What's happening here? Though my hands were shaking, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. We have to meet in person, my grandfather remarked. Over the phone, too much has to be explained. Still, you should know that we never stopped loving you. For years, we have been working with your mother to straighten things. Like you, we have been misled. The weight of his comments strikes me more forcefully than I anticipated. I wasn't sure whether I should be overwhelmed or relieved. All this time they were trying to contact my mother? Why not, they had told me. Why had they not been more forthcoming about it? Okay, I murmured at last, a knot in my gut. When would you like to get together? He detailed it for me, and we scheduled a time. Though I had no idea what to anticipate when I entered that conference, I knew it would be a conversation I would never forget. My grandparents were seated at a table in the rear when I got at the cafe we had decided upon. Their faces marked with age and anxiety. They seemed older than I remembered, but there was something in their eyes that suggested they hadn't truly given up on me. When they stood up to meet me, we gave uncomfortable hugs. It was weird, like though we were first-time meeting strangers. Between us, years of quiet, hurt, and lost opportunities were so much unspoken. "I'm glad you came," my grandmother remarked gently, her voice full of feeling. "We had wanted to talk to you for so long." Trying to sort my ideas, I sat down across from them. "I'm not even sure where to start," I remarked. "What exactly is all this about? For what reason now?" My granddad slanted forward. "Your mother, your name, has been lying to you, and you ought to be entitled to know the truth. You ought to hear it from us now." I inhaled deeply and started to brise. Their words would transform everything, whatever they said. "We helped your mother find out she was carrying Sasha," my grandfather started. "We supported her regardless of our dislike of Jacob. We made it plain that, not following all he had gone through with his addiction, we did not want her engaged with him. She did, however, pick him. We also cautioned her that things were not going to go perfectly." I stood shocked. This hardly at all matched what I had anticipated. Trying to understand what he was saying, my mind flew. "What do you mean, cautioned her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Why did you not pursue more?" "We tried what we could, but she was obstinate," my grandmother clarified. "She kept saying she loved him and would reject us every time we tried to step in. We did not stop trying to support her. Still, things grew much worse when you were born. We observed how bad things were, how badly Jacob was hurting the family, and we repeatedly advised her to let go of him for her own benefit as much as yours. This amounted to a lot to absorb." While my mother had been in the middle of all of this, I had never heard the degree of their participation or worries. It was not only about Sasha or me. My grandparents had been watching over the entire catastrophe, but they had also been excluded too. "Why never did you tell me any of this?" I asked, somewhat more forcefully than I meant. "I have spent years believing you simply didn't give me any thought." The eyes of my grandmother softened, and she sighed profoundly. "We could not tell you then, your name. Your mother made it plain that she would never talk to us again if we continued to bring it up for discussion. And we wanted not to lose you as well. We wanted to avoid aggravating matters." I sensed my chest constricting. It made sense now. The distance, the quiet. Even if it meant keeping quiet, they had been attempting to guard me in their own unique sense. Actually, though, I had needed to hear this all along. I had to know that they had not simply left me as my mother had done. Sensing my annoyance, my grandfather added, "It's not your fault. We ought to have pushed harder and done more." She continued pushing us away, though, and we were not sure how to reach her. This narrative revealed far more than I had known. It also included a great deal of suffering and choices taken that molded my life in ways I didn't quite grasp until now. I felt a range of emotions as they kept telling me about all that had happened, about their futile attempts to help my mom and their own anguish throughout the course of events. One session could not handle all the processing required. One thing was very evident, though. My grandparents had never ceased loving me. Even as my mother continued pushing them away, they had attempted to be there for me in their own unique manner. That day, as we said goodbye, I thought I had a fresh piece of the jigsaw. Still, the main issue begged, from here, whither did I go? Describing what it feels like when the individuals who ought to have been your family show up in your life but not in the manner you would have expected is difficult. Among such occasions was the phone call from my grandparents. Growing up, my mother would to mention their names in passing, primarily when she was annoyed or furious. I had heard their names before, but unlike my sister Sasha or mother, I did not really know them. It seemed unusual that they would suddenly be contacting me. They were calm when they reached out, but I could hear years of suffering in their voices. They said they were sorry for not being there earlier. They wanted things right and acknowledged they had let me down. That caught me off guard overall. It wasn't like I was hoping they would come swoop in to save me. The reality that my parents would not be present for me in the manner I had always wanted had already become accepted. Still, hearing from them was quite another. My grandparents went over the whole narrative. After I was born, they had tried to stay in touch with my mother, but she would ignore them. She was enraged with them for undermining her connection with Jacob and for not lending financial assistance while she was with him. Although they disapproved of her decisions, they had tried for years to be in her life. She seems to have poisoned everything, keeping them away for so long. They had been the ones truly wanting me to establish a relationship with. When they informed me about my mom's affair with Jacob while she was married to my father, it really got me on. It felt like a jumble of falsehoods and secrets overall. Though they had known about it, they had not spoken out. They had hoped my mother would turn around and leave Jacob permanently. She would come to sense. She had instead selected him above her own family. Their sense of betrayal was clear-cut, and somehow I knew it. They were offended by my mother's choices, not by me. It made logical now, why they had always been so far apart, and why they had been so let down in her. They were enraged learning about the circumstances of my parents kicking me out. Provided all the support my mother had provided her over the years, they were incredulous that she would treat her own child in such manner. They informed me they could not stand by and let her to keep treating me that way. It was at this point they decided Mom, Jacob, and Sasha were scheduled to be kicked from the house, that one my grandparents paid for. The one they bought since they wanted my mother to avoid financial difficulties. They advised me that right now this is my decision. Should I wish them to remain, they would. But they would arrange it if I wanted them out. I originally had no idea how I should feel. Some of me was startled. This was my family. The thought of my grandparents evicting my mother from a house she had paid for felt awful, even if I hadn't spoken to them in months. But later on I considered everything. About how my mother had misled me. About how she had not been there when I most needed her. About how she had seized my childhood and treated me as if it didn't count. Regarding also how my grandparents had been there despite all, at least they were making efforts. As though it would somehow offset missed time, my grandparents volunteered to handle my college loans. They said they would never desert me once more. They wanted me back among the family. They aimed for my happiness. It was the kind of thing I hadn't realized I needed. Someone who truly cared and ready to support me forward. Making the choice was not simple. I gave it much thought over a long period. I considered how my mother had treated me, how she had selected Jacob over me, how she had let me drop between the cracks while she was building her life with him. But I also considered the years I had missed them. The years my mother had persuaded me they had no interest in me. They did not want me to be in their life. Now, though, with everything out in the open, I had an opportunity to rewrite the tale, to have people who wanted me to succeed, who were ready to be by my side, who cared. After considering everything, I then told my grandparents what they ought to hear. I sought them out. I wished Sasha and my parents gone, and with that, it was clear. The ball was moving right now. Funny how life seems to drag you into areas you never would have considered. When I entered my old house, the one my grandparents had purchased for my family, I had no idea what to anticipate even after all that had happened. That spot had felt for years like nothing more than a reminder of all the broken things. My mom's lies, the betrayal, the quiet. When I returned, though, it felt different. In some sense I hadn't realized I missed. It felt like home once more. Not long after my family left, my grandparents moved in and invested time to make the house feel cozy once more. They had corrected problems, introduced fresh accents, even transformed my old room into a place that felt less like a relic from the past. That day when I entered the house, I had changed as much as the walls had. I had developed, Thanksgiving was almost here, and for the first time in years I really felt something almost like enthusiasm. My best friend and her parents, as well as my grandparents, were on their way. It felt proper. I was not resentful or furious or dreading the holidays for the first time. It was as if I had discovered something I never knew I had been searching for. A feeling of belonging, a place where I was welcomed rather than merely tolerated. Gone was the conflict I experienced in that house, one that always made me feel like an outsider. Rather, there was coziness. Though older and dealing with their own health issues, my grandparents were more than just someone I had to put up with. They were the folks who actually wanted me to be in their life. After all I had experienced with my mother, it was difficult to understand, but as we sat together over a peaceful supper, I became acutely aware of how much I had been without all these years. I nearly couldn't believe it when my grandparents volunteered to look after my student debts. Following all the years of suffering, the times I had to fight on my own were strange. Still, they meant it, and I could see the genuineness in their eyes. It was about proving they cared in ways they hadn't been able to before, not about getting my pardon or making up lost time. Though it was impossible to undo anything, they wanted to mend what had been broken, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was not merely a burden, or a mistake, or someone who had been overlooked. I felt as though I mattered. Thanksgiving was a celebration of healing as much as it was of food or family. The family of my best buddy was also there, and for the first time I felt like I really belonged somewhere. The talks were easy, the laughter was real, and it felt like a little peek of the future I could have. One in which I wasn't tormented by the past, where guilt or resentment wasn't weighing me down. This was an opportunity to start over, and I resolved to maximize it. My mother had not heard from me yet, hence at this point I was not sure what I was expecting. But I had at last arrived to a stage whereby I felt good without her approval or affirmation. Her words and deeds no longer had the same hold on me. I had made mine. She had made her decisions. I was not waiting for her to come to her senses or change. She chose not to be part of my life. I had mine to live. The degree to which I had allowed my mother's story define my existence for so long was among the toughest things to swallow. The things she told me about my grandparents, about their lack of concern or their abandonment of us, had convinced me. Those lies had been absorbed by me and left to sour in my mind, therefore influencing my perspective of the world. Unlearning that was difficult, particularly given the reality differed greatly from what I had been told. At least lately, though, I knew the truth. Though they were unable to constantly show it, my grandparents had cared for me all along. Even when my mother pushed them away, they had been trying to atone, do the right thing. Looking back, I cannot say I am not still somewhat resentful. It is difficult to let go entirely of the years lost, the years of stillness, the sense of abandonment. I have come to see, nevertheless, that holding to resentment or wrath has no use. It alters the present rather than the past. Right now, I can only move ahead, and I feel like I'm headed in the correct path, first in a long time. This year the holidays were unique. It went beyond food or presents or even customs. It was about family in the most fundamental sense, about individuals who really cared about one another and were ready to turn up even after all that had gone on. This was my family now, my grandparents, the family of my best buddy, and some other relatives I had been introduced to. This constituted my system of support. Those were the ones who, despite my ignorance of my need for them, had never given up on me. Ultimately, the house was not really important. It had not been the money or the tangible objects. Between the walls, it was the love and attention that permeated the spaces. It was the folks that guaranteed I had somewhere to fit. At last, I realized what family truly meant. Not only blood, not only history, but also the people who would choose to be at your side no matter what. Surrounded by the people who had been there for me when none else had. As I sat with my grandparents that evening, I realized my destiny was in my hands right now. The past could not hurt me anymore. It followed me. Moving ahead was all that remained to do, and I was ready for that. And thus I discovered a fresh beginning in a place once devoid of life, a place of residence, a family cherished by me. Above all, though, I discovered myself,